This is A Line Around Your Thoughts, a podcast that centers on conversations with artists, writers, musicians, and creatives from around the Inland Northwest. I'm E.J. Iannelli, and my guest in the Roquehart Media Studio today is James Lowe, music director for the Spokane Symphony. So welcome, James.
Hi, E.J. Thanks for having me.
And I've just noticed my voice is a little gravelly because the pollen is killing me. I don't know if you're experiencing the same.
No, it's the cigars for me.
Okay.
No, I do get it. I actually get it very badly, but I get it a little bit later. So I'm going back to Scotland in mid-May, and it will really kick in then.
Yeah, we've got a horse chestnut that's right out in front of our house, and man, every time that kicks in during the spring, I just
Doesn't like you.
No. So we were talking just before we kind of began everything, and we were talking about the Star Wars concert that just was, and there was some drama last year with the Star Wars concert. So you just did Return of the Jedi, and then we've had Empire Strikes Back, and there was a little bit of shuffling at the last minute.
The Empire definitely struck back. So, when you're doing a movie, the soundtrack live to the movie, it's a really complicated thing. You've got, as the conductor, you've got your score with kind of time codes running, and you've got what we call streamers on a little iPad. So you've got the movie playing on an iPad, and it shows you these lines go across, and you've got to hit certain points of music to line up exactly, to a millisecond. And of course, Darth Vader doesn't move for anybody, so you've got to get it right. Anyway, Morihiko Nakahara, who has been a long time friend and conductor of the symphony, he's our kind of special ops conductor, right? You have anything that's incredibly difficult, you ask Morihiko. You've also got to be licensed to conduct Star Wars, so the mouse, the Disney Corp, you've got to be licensed by the mouse. So anyway, he's got all that. He did all the rehearsals, everything was going great. He got out of his car, fell over, hit his head off a concrete planter, and had to be rushed to the ER. And I got like an hour or two's notice to go in and see if it was possible to put this together live in real time. So we started a bit late. I had a bit of a look at as much of the score as I could, and then off we went. And I didn't know at that time if Morihiko was going to make it back or not. And thank God, after about 45 minutes, that this kind of figure I see crawling up to my left, and it's Morihiko. It's a bit of dialogue where the orchestra's not playing. He says, "You want to carry on?" I'm like, "No." And so he takes over with, a huge stitches in his forehead, and I think also a mild concussion. We found out later, and he absolutely nails the rest of the show. It was really heroic stuff.
No kidding, he's a trooper.
He's an absolute,
but not
trooper.
Not a stormtrooper. But
no, not a stormtrooper, not actual trooper. So this year, I left my phone off.
And are you a Star Wars fan? Did you have enough knowledge of the? Some people it might not be for them. So I wasn't sure if Star Wars was definitely your bag.
Oh, I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. The thing is though, even if you're a big nerd, you don't know the score to the millimetric precision. You've got to know it. You have to line up a lot. And when they originally recorded it, of course, it's John Williams basically doing it by sight, pretty much. And so it really pushes and pulls quite a lot. So lining it up it's tricky. But yeah, it's amazing fun. I just wish it wasn't quite as white knuckle as it turned out to be.
And so coming up this weekend, you have Masterworks 9. This is the big season finale. You've got Zuill Bailey, the Bachfest impresario, and he's going to be soloing there. Walk us through this concert.
So it's really it's a festival of storytelling, essentially, in music. So we begin with a piece by the young French composer Camille Pépin, which is called Les Eaux Célestes, the Celestial Waters, which tells this mythological story of Chinese mythologies of two lovers who are gods, who are separated for various reasons, and then who yearn for each other, and they're allowed to meet every seventh day of the seventh month, just once a year. And eventually the birds are so sad that they can't cross the Milky Way and meet. They form a bridge of their wings and go over. So it's really beautiful story, and the music is this very French perfumed reaction to that. So that's how we start, and then we have the Tales of Hemingway by.
And can I, before we move on to that, I just wanted to talk about this piece because it's very atmospheric. It's pretty much does what it says on the tin. It does evoke that idea of celestial waters, but I have to say, with the first movement, it's easy to get lulled into a into a very relaxed state. And then the second movement will jar anybody. It comes like a slap upside the head.
Exactly. So. I kind of like those tricks. But it's very atmospheric. And I'm really interested in how does music without words tell stories, and how does it evoke things in us? And it's very interesting for me how you, as a composer, great composers, can do this. We recently did Haydn's Creation, and it's full of these incredibly clever pictures painted in music. There's a bit where God creates the worm and he writes incredibly slimy music underneath it, and the lion roaring and great whales kind of rolling around in the bottom of the sea. And anyway, it's just fascinating to me how this seemingly abstract art form can really tell very concrete stories and really create very real atmospheres and emotions in us.
Yeah. And then we move into Tales from Hemingway. And I'm guessing that this has a similar storytelling or narrative bent.
Yes, exactly. So each movement is a different story from Hemingway, with the cellist as the kind of protagonist going on throughout. Michael Doherty, who is a really phenomenal composer, who writes extremely evocative and colourful and fun music. And so he's actually coming to town for it, which is going to be great. So he'll be around. We have a relationship with him. He wrote a piece called The Lincoln Letters, which we recorded with Thomas Hampson before my time. But he's an amazing composer. And this piece is full of the energy and terseness in a way, not in a negative way, but the directness of Hemingway's prose, I think is very much reflected in Doherty's writing. And particularly at the end, you have a very kind of Spanish flair movement to end. And it's a bit of a showstopper. It won a Grammy Award. And it's, if you think kind of modern music is difficult to approach, this music is so visceral and evocative. I think you can't fail to be drawn in by it.
And I was also surprised to find that Zuill Bailey is no stranger to this piece. He has performed it before.
It was written for him, I believe.
Was it really?
Yeah, so
okay.
He gave the premiere. It was a co-commission between a bunch of orchestras. He did the recording with Nashville, which won the Grammy.
Is that what his Grammy win is?
Yeah.
Okay. So his Grammy win derives from this piece.
Exactly.
No kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
No kidding.
And so what's quite nice is that when we started the season, we did Jesse Montgomery's Rounds with Adagian Pratt, and they had just won the Grammy this year for that in the same category. So that was kind of nice. It was all of a sudden, and I like to think that I did this on purpose, but it was total serendipity, that all of a sudden we now have, the season is bookended by two Grammy Award-winning pieces and the same performers who won the Grammy for it. So, like I say, like to say I planned that out, but I didn't have inside intel on that one. By the time we went to print, I didn't know they were going to win the Grammy.
Yeah, but it's nice when things work out that way.
I love it when a plan comes together. As the great philosopher Hannibal said, you know.
And then the next piece is Edward Elgar. I mean, he's not a modern composer, but not necessarily a contemporary one.
Not a contemporary composer. A composer very dear to my heart. He was born not terribly far from kind of where I grew up. He was a bit of an
And remind us,
outsider.
you grew up in Nottingham.
So I grew up in the Midlands of England. So I kind of now feel more Scottish than English because I've lived in Scotland way much longer, and I married into Scotland. But I grew up in Nottinghamshire, right in the middle of England. So if you cut off Scotland off the top of the map, which may happen, you never know, what's left right in the middle is literally the smack in the centre of the map. Middle England in every possible sense is my hometown, Nottingham. And he grew up in kind of the middle west of England. Grew up as a bit of an outsider. You know, he was essentially a working class kid and was a Catholic in a time when that was not really what the mainstream of the aristocracy, of course, and whatnot that. And so he felt, I think, a lot of his life that he was kept out of British high society, and then eventually became famous in Germany and became very well fated abroad. And then, of course, as the English often do, when somebody is famous abroad, they say, oh, well, maybe we're not so bad. And they kind of, the prodigal son returned, and of course he's one of our greatest composers. But this piece, In the South, it was written when he was in Alassio in Italy.
Mm.
And there's a beautiful moment in the middle of the piece where he had been kind of walking the streets one night and heard a folk song being sung. So this is kind of beautiful viola solo in the middle that's supposed to be this folk song. And then other bits depicting kind of these huge arches of these Roman bridges, these aqueducts, but a really exciting and warm-hearted piece. I think really captures the kind of Italian mood and the spirit and the kind of that late night perfume on a hot summer's day as the day cools, that kind of feeling you have in Italy. I think that he absolutely nails that in this piece.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that any of these pieces are particularly cerebral.
No.
They're very emotional. They deal in something that I think is very accessible. If you just happen to not even love music, but just like music, they really, they kind of grip the soul.
Right, it's a bit of an end-of-term party feeling, I think, for me. This program, absolutely, they're all very, very evocative works, and that's really what I was wanting to do, and a celebration. They're all in different ways, but they're all quite celebratory, energetic works. But they also have a core of something that's a lot deeper and more intimate, which I think is important. You can't just have. Extroverts are great, but the introverted side of music is also very important too. And every piece has something of that in it as well.
Yeah, and we move from the heavens to Spain and then Italy, and we stay in Italy for the last piece, for the Respighi.
We do, and the last piece is Respighi's Pines of Rome, each movement of which represents a different set of pine trees. So you have some around a catacomb, so it's all very dark. You have one that's out in the countryside, and you have a nightingale singing. You have one that's in the middle of the city, and that's how we start, this kind of boisterous, you can hear like children screaming and running around. And then you end with this astonishing ending, which depicts, if you've seen the movie Spartacus, the kind of final scene of Spartacus. This is this walking along this road, and that you hear this kind of almost this army getting closer and closer and closer, and it just ends in utter noisy triumph. It's a spine-tingling piece, it really is. And so it felt like that was a kind of fun way to end the season.
Yeah, speaking of Spartacus, I was talking to someone and happened to mention that it was directed by Stanley Kubrick, and they said, really? I wouldn't have paired that with his work, but there you go.
I didn't know that, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, piece of trivia to take home. Yeah, it's it doesn't seem like a Kubrickian movie, but then when you look at it and think, well, what exactly defines a Kubrickian movie? But maybe that's a topic for another day.
So. You may have just helped me win quiz night with that little gem. You never know. I'll store it away.
Glad I could help. Yeah. And then you just, and I say you as a stand-in, as a proxy for the Spokane Symphony Orchestra, you just announced the 80th season, and so that's a whole other 9 Masterworks concerts, plus Pop's concert, plus all the other things that the symphony does, and that was just announced, and you're already looking ahead to what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, I mean, in Symphony World, we plan ahead pretty far because, of course, artists are available at certain times or not available. And yeah, the planning of the season, it's a little bit like, in Scotland, there's the Forth Rail Bridge, which is a very beautiful bridge that goes over the Firth of Forth. And the joke is that it's always being repainted, because the minute they paint from one end to the other, and the minute they're done, it's taken so long they have to go back and start again. So this is constantly being painted. So it's a little bit like painting the Forth Rail Bridge, is that every time the season is done and complete and out, I'm already now thinking about the 26-27 season. I'm already kind of taking notes and figuring things out, because by October of this year, that has pretty much got to be set. So we plan pretty far out. So yeah, we're just launched now. We launched it back May 1st, the new season. And I'm very excited about it. I'm always very excited about it, but I think this season, the 80th season, really, I tried to make something kind of special for the season that has a feeling of, it's kind of monumental feeling. That was what I was kind of aiming for. And I think, well, I hope that's what we've got.
Yeah, and those round numbers seem somehow more significant, even though really, what's the difference between the 80th season and the 79th season or the 81st season, other than that they're another year on.
Right.
But those round numbers seem to warrant special attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we, I had interviewed you for the Inlander for this and did a write-up, and we had talked extensively at that time about some of the parallels between the 80th season and the 79th season. And at the time I said, it seemed very, very substantial. Mm-hmm. And you had pointed out a lot of the parallels that it has with the 79th season in terms of just making sure that some of the same stakeholders are involved, like the Spokane Symphony Chorale. And so there are these certain almost fixed events that are on the calendar, like Beethoven's Ninth and Handel's Messiah. And then there are other concerts that take on kind of the same flavor, but you've also there are things that have changed. Mm-hmm. And you're looking a little further back when, for example, highlighting female composers. There were a number of contemporary female composers in this past season, Camille Papin being one of them. And now we're looking back to, Fanny Mendelssohn and. So, let's talk about the new season.
Well, it started, that particular thread started with Alma Mahler. So I had this idea. I really wanted to open the season with some Mahler. We haven't played Mahler in a while. Kind of recovering from the pandemic, Mahler is the music of, I wouldn't say an egomaniac, but certainly a very massively thinking man. And the First Symphony is really just this phenomenal work. And Mahler always said famously, a symphony should embrace the world, and so it does. And it's got really some pretty hot, kind of honky, folky music in the middle of one of the moments. It's got some kind of tongue-in-cheek stuff. You have Frere Jacques played in the minor key, supposed to represent animals at the huntsman's funeral, and a very rustic Austrian dance. But then this hugely stormy ending that ends, of course, in triumph. So I wanted to do Mahler 1. And I'm very keen to pair Gustav Mahler with Alma Mahler, his wife. So she was, in her own right, a very fine composer. At the time they met, she was studying composition with another composer, a third wheel, in this case, Alexander Zemlinsky. And he was her teacher, and he wanted to marry Alma. He was desperately in love with her. That seemed to be a theme that went through her life. People fell in love with Alma Mahler pretty easily, so she must have been a remarkable woman. But she, I think, realized that hitching her wagon to Gustav was probably better than poor old Zemlinsky, so he got ditched. And then, ironically, when they were married, Gustav Mahler said, well, there's only room for one composer, and it's going to be me. So she stopped composing. But we have a set of early songs from her that are extremely beautiful, really very much in this very high romantic style, very evocative music. And there's been an orchestration of those by Colin and David Matthews, two brothers, English composers. So I kind of wanted to pair that together. And then from that moment, I thought, there's an interesting thing here, because there's a lot of women composers from the 19th century who really had huge potential, but never wrote past the age of about 20, 25. So the other one being Clara Schumann. And Clara Schumann married Robert Schumann, and Robert did not discourage her from composing, quite the opposite, but he became very ill, and he ended up in an asylum, as they called them then, with the young Johannes Brahms as the go-between, because as a woman she wasn't allowed in there. And then when Robert Schumann died, she was a concert pianist and had to give up composing to go out on the road and do concerts in order to feed their kids. So she gave up composing as well, and we're performing her piano concerto, which she wrote at the age of 19, which is a remarkably beautiful work. And I always think what a shame it is. How would, you listen to early Brahms, we're playing Brahms' First Symphony in that program, which is not that early because he was not young when he wrote the First Symphony, but you listen to earlier works by Brahms, and you think Clara really had, I think, very similar potential. And what would late period Clara Schumann's music sound like? We'll never know. But we have this one concerto from her from her teenage years, which is really remarkable. So clearly phenomenal musician. So there's that little thread, and then we have Fanny Mendelssohn, along with Felix Mendelssohn, we're playing Mendelssohn's Italian Symphony. And I thought, well, in that case, his sister Fanny wrote an overture, which is really great piece of music. So we should feature that as well. So yeah, there's this thread of kind of almost forgotten voices that never quite got to flourish.
Yeah, and you have two of the concerts that you described as the love triangle, or the gooseberry concerts.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But it's really limited to those two, and then you do have Fanny Mendelssohn, who was the sister of Felix Mendelssohn.
Yeah. So anyway, it's also I find it kind of interesting. Each concert kind of has its own themes running through them, but I quite like to go thread some idea through a little bit throughout the season as well. I mean, it's not in every concert, of course, but it's just nice that there's this little through line that kind of links everything up.
And you've also got a number of soloists who are going to be drawn from the Spokane Symphony proper, which is really encouraging to see. You have Mateusz, who's the concert master, and Mateusz has stepped forward into the spotlight before. But talk about some of the other soloists, and talk about Mateusz too, but talk about some of the soloists that you're drawing from the Spokane Symphony to really kind of show their mettle.
Yeah, so we did this in the season we're just finishing now. We had Julia Pike, our wonderful principal flute, played the Christopher Rouse concerto. And I think I really want the people of Spokane to really understand and know what phenomenal musicians they have in their local Walmart, walking around in their off time. So I really wanted them to know and appreciate these incredible artists. So we actually feature 3 soloists from within the orchestra this season. So we have Mateusz Wolski, who's our concert master, and he does a concerto every year with us. And this year he's playing the Symphonie Espagnole by Lalo. So that's the program with the Fanny Mendelssohn Overture, the Lalo Espagnole, and then Mendelssohn Italian. So again, that concert's called Primavera, very bright and fresh. And that's coming, I think that one is just in March, I believe. So as spring is... As we here are desperate for spring to start, you can just it's just about to go. So that's the concert that will hopefully whet our appetite for glorious.
Yeah, I think that's either 6. Is it 6 or 7? I think 7 or 6 is the Schumann concert. Yeah. If I'm I'm trying to think back. I can't remember off the top of my head,
but I could check. But in any case, that concert's coming just as spring is probably hopefully just kind of straining at the leash a little bit. And then we have a concert featuring Nick Carper, our principal viola, with a work by Paul Hindemith called Trauermusik, so Music of Mourning, which was written, it's a remarkable piece, it was written in a day. Mm-hmm. So he was supposed to be performing at the BBC Proms in London, and the King died. And so they had to change the programme, and he said, well, I'll write something. So he wrote this piece for viola and strings, which is very, very beautiful, which ends with a quotation from a Bach chorale, which we then have members of a chorale singing its original form. And the third soloist we have from the orchestra is John Church, our principal trombonist. And the trombone, I think, is not often featured as a solo instrument.
Nor the viola.
Nor the viola, yeah. Indeed, exactly. I mean, I am myself a non-practicing violist. But yeah, John is a phenomenal musician, and he's playing. He is playing a work by
Creston,
Paul. Thank you, Paul Creston.
And I had to jog a little bit for that as well. I was like,
yes, it is Creston.
Yeah, Creston.
Which is a very, very rhythmic, dancey piece of music, fantasy for trombone and orchestra, and that again, in thinking what can I put around that, I like this idea of symphonic dancers. Mm-hmm. So we have the Leonard Bernstein symphonic dancers from West Side Story to open it, and then a very different form of symphonic dances from Rachmaninoff with his symphonic dances, which both pieces actually interestingly feature a saxophone in the orchestra, but to very different effect. It's really interesting. So Bernstein's obviously using their sax in a more jazzy, bluesy kind of way, and Rachmaninoff is using it as a new instrument that sounds like a kind of an augmentation of clarinet. So that's a kind of interesting little counterplay. But
speaking of the sax, I always found it interesting. Absolutely fascinating that audiences and classical music aficionados kind of rioted in the streets when the saxophone was introduced and really worked to keep it out of the classical repertoire. It seems bizarre. I mean, I guess, what was classical music's loss was jazz's gain. But yeah, it's always fascinating to me that an instrument could be so polarizing.
I know it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, when you think go back to when the clarinet appeared, I mean, the clarinet was a much later invention than the oboe. So before you would have, the biggest orchestra would have maybe flutes, oboes, bassoons, horns, and then all of a sudden you have this new thing, and this new third wind instrument. And it's hugely popular, and to the extent that Mozart wants to rewrite Handel's Messiah to throw in clarinets, because it's like, we've got to have this cool sound in Handel's Messiah. So, yeah, it's interesting for me how certain instruments do take off and some don't. I don't know, I think maybe with the saxophone, it's hard to listen because we're listening with modern ears, right?
Right.
So maybe it's just there's a connotation for us of jazz that we hear when we hear that sound. And so it feels like if a saxophone is in a symphony orchestra, it's because of this specific thing. But I do know there's a friend who used to be a roommate of mine back in Boston who is very much a classical saxophone player. He plays just classical pieces on the sax.
Oh, fantastic.
And of which there are thousands. There's a very rich repertoire. But yeah, it was definitely jazz's gain on that one. I think we were a little bit too stiff to change.
But that highlights, I think, another theme, one of many in the season, which is these perhaps underappreciated or underrecognized instruments between the viola and then the trombone and then, right, in the incorporation of the saxophone. So yeah, you have maybe underrepresented or underrecognized female composers, underrecognized instruments. I mean, it's doing the Spokane Symphony's part to kind of shine a light on these corners.
It's the Cinderella season, maybe. I don't know what you call it. But I do think it's also important. When building a season, of course, I want to have the big blockbusters that people know and love. So we have Grieg's Peer Gynt in there, which is probably some of the most famous classical music ever written. If you think of the Morning Mood and of the Trolls. There's so much music in there that is so famous, often through Looney Tunes, which I have to say props to Looney Tunes for using all that kind of music. But I think you have to balance that with works that are unknown and underrepresented. And one of my favourite things is digging something out from a dusty library shelf and finding something amazing. I mean, a few seasons ago, we did a piece by Cherepnin called The Distant Princess, Prelude to the Distant Princess, and it is the most fantastic piece. It's an absolute gem. It's perfect. And this was certainly the first Cherepnin I'd ever conducted. But I love this idea. I've always been such a nerd. I kind of love rooting through the library stacks and seeing what is lurking in there.
What piece are you most proud of this season? What gem did you unearth and kind of, rub off and then present that I think everyone's going to like this?
I wouldn't say necessarily it's a gem so much as a pairing.
Okay.
So we're doing Benjamin Britten's Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra.
Right.
And before we do that, we have a piece by Grace Williams, who was about a contemporary of Benjamin Britten.
A Welsh composer.
Composer, and it's a fantasy on Welsh nursery tunes. And the Benjamin Britten is essentially a fantasy written on a tune by Henry Purcell, a hornpipe tune by Henry Purcell. So I kind of like that little parallel. That feels nice to me, and it feels like they complement each other because they're both ostensibly for children, or literally, music that is written for a child's ear, but they're actually both very sophisticated works and quite fun. And the kicker for for the Britain is that we've asked Jess Walter, big friend of the symphony, to, there's two versions you can play of the Britain. One is with a narration and one is without. And the old narration is very, this is the BBC, you'd listen with mother kind of thing. At your mother's knee, we'll now hear the piccolo, which feels a little outdated. So I thought it could do a bit of freshening out from Jess. So it's going to be more like, I think, the Inland Northwester's guide to the orchestra.
Yeah, I think you said you plied him with martinis, enough martinis that he said, you know what, I think this is a good idea.
One too many, yes. It was actually his wife Anne who agreed to it on his behalf, and then.
Oh, that was nice of her.
That was very nice.
Tell her we
so
appreciate
thank
that.
You, so yes, so we so that I think will be a season highlight for me. But that pairing I think is quite nice.
Yeah, and I'm particularly fond of the idea behind the Stolen Melodies concert, because by tracing these echoes from one work to the next, I always find that fascinating. It's always nice when you find that those things buried in there. I remember I was reviewing a jazz album by, it was a contemporary album, but it was very much in a traditional mold. And a guy had quoted a line that I knew very well from a Clifford Brown tune. And I mentioned that, and he was so psyched that I caught it. But in just detecting that echo, somehow it made it just a little more, it was a little wink, a little nod. And just as a listener, it was, just made the music somehow more richer. Made the music more richer. It made it more richer.
Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced that Bill Evans in A Kind of Blue quotes a bit of Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra. I'm pretty sure.
I wouldn't put it past him.
I would know.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the kind of thing Bill Evans would do. But yeah, I like that too. I mean, that concert, the start of that concert was actually a piece in the first half of Ray Vaughan Williams' Tallis Fantasia, which is a work that I absolutely love. In the UK we have this radio station, Classic FM, which plays it's very kind of the smooth classics at 7, which I would kind of wish they'd have angry classics at 8, but they don't. It's all very kind of classical music as relaxation. But this piece is really always in their kind of top 10 every year. And I love it. It reminds me of the Lake District of England. It's called the Larkis. It's not called the Larkis ending, excuse me. I'm going to talk about good God. This is the end of a long week, EJ.
For both of us, yeah.
Is the Fantasia on a theme of Thomas Tallis. Thomas Tallis, the great Elizabethan composer who, roughly contemporary of Shakespeare, who wrote a brilliant Psalter tune, which, when Vaughan Williams was kind of redoing the British hymnal, the English hymnal, he found this tune and then decided to write a fantasia on it, which is a remarkable work. It has a large string orchestra with a solo string quartet in the middle, and then a second orchestra somehow behind or hidden or away, which acts as these almost like an echo of these voices from the past. Mm-hmm. So I like the idea of starting a sequence where you start with a group of singers singing the Tallis hymn tune and then going directly into the Vaughan Williams, and then we go directly into the Hindemith trial music I mentioned, which ends with a quote from Bach, and then we have the Bach sung again by the choir back where the hidden orchestra was for the Vaughan Williams. So it's a kind of a, sometimes I like to do these things where you have a program or a part of a program that is totally played without break between pieces. So you have different composers, different pieces, but they all flow one into another to make a big kind of superstructure.
Yeah, and it, I think establishes that continuity, because I think the classical canon can sometimes be perceived as something that is relegated to the past. And I feel like something like this shows that progression, and how different composers borrow from one another, and how the music has evolved and continues to evolve.
Right. And I think for me, that there is this very dangerous mythology that the symphony orchestra is a museum of dead music, which I really cannot agree with at all. I think what great art from the past, whether it's a Shakespeare play or a Brahms symphony, the reason we still listen to it and we still engage with these works is because they have incredibly deep human truths. Yeah. The humanity in those works is just as true. And there's a wonderful quote from, I'm trying to remember his name, I think Suviraj Grub. He was a I think, a record producer for Decca. And I saw him interviewed, and he said, there are moments when you listen to a piece of music and you think, oh, I know this emotion. Someone has been there before me. I am not alone.
Yeah.
And I certainly feel that with you have these moments when you listen to a piece of music and you think, that I know that emotion. I felt that bittersweetness or whatever it is. And that moment of being touched so deeply by somebody who's possibly long dead is astonishing to me. I mean, this is the miracle of music for me.
Yeah.
Is how those emotions, somebody can feel an emotion 300 years ago and make me 300 years later experience that same thing is really an astonishing bit of whatever you want to call it, biology or chemistry or soul, perhaps, if you believe in such things, which I do. That for me is just one of the most beautiful experiences.
Yeah. I mean, even this podcast takes its name from a quote that is, art is a line around your thoughts. And to me, that expressed something ineffable about the experience of coming into contact with a work of art that does either, whether it's emotionally or intellectually, just kind of clarifying things. And suddenly these things that you couldn't quite nail down become more crystalline through that encounter with a classical symphony or any number of works.
Yeah. And it can happen in words, in literature or painting or art or a pop song or who cares. But it's out there all the time in humans. This is one of the great things that we do, is we somehow find a way of encoding and capturing things that really are almost inexpressible, and yet we get them somehow on a piece of paper or on a canvas, and we pass them down generations, and that's astonishing.
And to anyone who says that classical music is, who's standing outside the Spokane Symphony with a placard that reads, classical is a museum, or symphonies are a museum of dead music. You can put paid to that by the Sidney Guillaume piece that is coming up right at the end of next season, and it's still tentatively titled New Work. So it doesn't even have you have no insight into this, but have you given him some ideas on what you might like?
A little bit. So this is the last Masterworks of the season, and I wanted to feature works by composers who found a home in the USA. And so Sidney Guillaume is one of them, who was born in Haiti and now lives in Oregon. And then we have Bela Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra, which was entirely written when he was living in New York. And then we have Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on the Theme of Paganini, which, although wasn't written when he was living in the US, Rachmaninoff settled here. But Sidney, we did a premiere of his maybe 3 seasons ago, 2-3 seasons ago, called A Taste of Freedom, which was for choir and orchestra, and that was a co-commission with EWU. And then from there, he had an orchestral piece that he'd written that I think because the pandemic hadn't been performed. And so we gave a performance of that. And every time we do his works, everybody loves his music. It's so vibrant and thoughtful. And so I contacted him and said, okay, here's the deal. Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, Rhapsody on the Theme of Paganini, 10 to 12 minutes of music, go. So he said, okay, fine. So, sometimes when you commission, you want something very specific in a program, and sometimes the composer and you can just say, this is the orchestration you've got, this is how much time you've got to fill, these are your fellow composers in the program, have at it. So that's what he's doing. So I don't know, there's no title for it yet as far as he's told me, but that's his brief.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then, the symphony chorale is getting involved, as you mentioned. I don't know if you wanted to give them any special mention.
I would love to. I mean, we are relatively hot off the heels of Haydn's Creation, where the chorale were really spectacular. Not an easy sing, and particularly the way I do it. There were 94 singers.
Are you a taskmaster with the chorale?
Yes. Yeah. Not well. I'm a taskmaster. Dr. Meg Stolman, who is the conductor and artistic director of the chorale, is very much a taskmaster. I think it's more a case of bad cop, worse cop, with her as worse cop. So there, and but there are ways of making things easy for a chorale, and I don't generally tend to do them. I tend to be quite. I treat them as if they are professional musicians, which they are an unpaid volunteer group, but really the professionalism they bring is astounding. So that was great fun. So every year I want to feature the chorale in at least one big work. So for the forthcoming season, it's Verdi's Requiem, which is about as big as it gets. It's a very Italian view of essentially, the transition from this world to the next.
And as Meg Stolman herself said, that it is very operatic because it's Verdi. I mean, he brings that sensibility to it, and so, he pulls out all the stops
hugely. It's not so much over the top as halfway down the other side, I would say. And if you don't know the work, you will absolutely recognize the Dies Irae moment, which has this thumping bass drum on the offbeats. Magnificent work, but not just kind of high fever drama. There's also a moment of a huge amount of music that is incredibly transcendental and intimate and beautiful. So it really does, again, it's cliche, I think, to say, well, this work takes you on a journey, but this really does.
And then with the final concert, you also are featuring a soloist who has appeared before, and that is Evren Özil.
That's right. Evren has not appeared, Evren has not appeared with the symphony before, but he is no stranger to Spokane. There is a family link here, actually. But I first heard him a year or two ago with the Spokane String Quartet, and was hugely impressed with him. And so I was kind of earmarking him for a future event. And this is how it tends to work often, particularly with young soloists. I'll encounter someone, and I have a little list I keep going. And then when something appears that seems the right fit for them, that's what we do. So he's playing the Rachmaninoff Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini. Again, a incredibly popular and beautiful work, probably with one of the best tunes ever written. As it happens, is pretty much just a tune that Paganini wrote upside down. Turns out it's even better upside down.
He wrote it upside down?
No, so the variation,
right?
The famous variation that Rachmaninoff wrote is basically the tune that
just
Paganini
inverted.
Wrote. Well, not just inverted, but that's the idea.
I see.
Inverts the intervals, and then and you end up with this really spectacular moment.
Cool. And looking sort of big picture at this season, now there's always, I think, an effort to make sure that regular symphony goers have a reason to attend. And you had alluded to this in staging some of the better known works, and then also kind of introducing some obscure works. Before we close, one of the things that I really wanted to talk about was ways that the symphony is addressing folks who say, I'm not a classical music lover, or classical music is not for me. And so I'm just curious as to what the symphony is doing to kind of cultivate that next generation of listeners.
Well, there's a lot we do. Some of it is education work. So we have a very robust program now. In fact, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We have Jason Moody, who is our kind of head of engagement and community work, who also happens to be a violinist in the orchestra. He's doing an amazing job. And so now we have a program that literally goes from the age of 0 with a lullaby project where parents write a letter to their newborn child, and then we have composers work with them to set it to music, which we compose and which we record rather and give to the parents, and have a little concert. That's in collaboration with the library. And then on the other end, we have a dementia project, which is taking music into memory care units, and it's been shown now pretty robustly through very many studies that there's a very physiological effect that music has, particularly with people suffering from dementia. But then we have our huge program, the kind of K through 12, which is where I think we are trying to develop a new audience. We have Symphony Day, where about, I think, 6,000 kids from all over the region, not just Spokane, but from all over. We have kids who drive 5-6 hours to come to this, and that introduces them to the orchestra and the instruments of the orchestra. It's super fun. That'll be conducted by our old assistant conductor, Shira Samuel Schrag. But I think for me also it's not the music, I think, that is the barrier. There's two things that's the barrier. First thing is that I speak to people all the time and they say, well, I love classical music, but I don't know enough about it to appreciate it.
Right, yeah.
And my answer to that is, do you have one ear that almost works or better? And is your heart beating? And if the answer to either of those is yes, then you have all the equipment you need to appreciate classical music, because you just listen to it like you listen to any other music, and it speaks to you or it doesn't speak to you, and that's fine. There are some pieces that don't speak to everybody, and that's okay. I mean, there are pieces and composers, and I'm not going to name them because that's your next question, who don't really speak to me, but that's also fine. Interestingly, it used to be Verdi. I used to really have a problem with Verdi. Didn't understand it, couldn't get it, thought it was totally over the top.
Even the Requiem. And now I am totally turned around on that opinion. I was just being young and kind of stupid, and I didn't realize the subtlety that is in Verdi, because I think there is a huge subtlety in there, but if you just kind of play it rum-ti-tum, it can sound a bit banal. But if you play it with the understanding that in these very simple accompaniments, sometimes he's conveying a huge amount of emotion, all of a sudden it makes total sense. Yeah. So that was just the fact I was immature and I hadn't got it at the time. But now I love his music. So I think not every piece has to go for everyone. And then I think we have to overcome this barrier idea that classical music is somehow for the 1% of the 1%. It's a gated community. You know, I always say when you watch an episode of Frasier, which I love, by the way, but when I watched Frasier, Marty Crane is sitting in his ratty recliner with his dog and his beer watching the game, a real kind of man's man, when his sons, Niles and Frasier, are just totally effete and out of touch. And the shorthand for that is they're into fine wine, Michelin star dining, and the symphony and the opera, right? That's the shorthand in our culture for being out of touch. Now, I don't think this music is out of touch at all. I think it's visceral and exciting and emotional and moving and nuanced, incredibly nuanced. And I think people always say to me, well, there's a terrible danger. The audience for classical music is getting older and older. And I say, yeah, and it's been doing that for about the last 150 years. It might just be that classical music is something that you begin to appreciate more as you experience more of life. Mm-hmm. And you hear music that is ambiguous sometimes, because that's how life is. That's how emotions can often be. It's not just my baby left me or I'm in love. There's something between that, right? And very often these nuances are where classical music works, because the music is often working over a longer period of time. And so therefore, when you listen to, say, Mahler's First Symphony, what you're getting is not a 3-minute condensation of a really lovely idea, but you're getting, an hour of something changing and developing and warping and coming in and out of focus until you get to this incredible ending, which, because you've been through that period of sitting and listening to this piece for an hour, has a visceral effect on you. The death of classical music has been heralded for a long time. I've got a chart on my wall in my office here, which is what is killing classical music right now, and it goes back to something like 1300. And the first thing was lascivious musicians, which and then the saxophone. Yeah.
The saxophone comes a bit later. Yes, exactly. Interestingly, I think lascivious musicians we haven't killed it yet. But then there's also recordings coming in, and I don't know, the saxophone, the clarinet, whatever. But there's always this idea. And there has been this trope for a long time that the audience is dying out and aging out. Yeah. Our third biggest demographic in our Masterworks programs right now, I think, is 25 to 35. So we're doing fine. Yeah. We're doing fine. But again, it's not without effort. You have to bring in people. You've got to be welcoming. And I think for me, my job is to be a little bit the go-between about to say, well, where does your experience of life and this piece of music, where do they intersect? And if I can say a few words before we start a piece, that's what I'm trying to do is help people. Oh, if I listen to it like that, then I absolutely understand. This was written during that period of that composer's life. This is what was happening to that composer. And now I hear what she's writing about in the Romanza, for example, movement of the Clara Schumann piano concerto. I know that. I've lived that. Yeah. And this music speaks to me.
And of course, the lowdown and the pre-concert talks help with that appreciation element as well.
That's right. So the lowdown is an hour-long. I don't like to call it a lecture because that sounds very didactic. And
very dry,
Yeah. And then I say, it's got a PowerPoint, and that makes it sound even worse. When I say PowerPoint, it's usually stupid stuff I found on the internet that's kind of funny. And that really is exactly that. I go through the program of the Masterworks I'll be conducting the following weekend in a bit of a deep dive, but that is for the musical layperson. It's not for an aficionado. There's plenty in there that if you're on the inside baseball, hopefully it'll get you more inside the baseball game than before. But it's also to really help people understand that when they listen to the concerts the weekend, they can really see the big picture.
So we'll leave it there on a very optimistic note for classical music in general, but that's not the end of this. And so here's the surprise. In addition to the video cameras when you walked in, there's a lightning round.
Uh-oh.
So it's just a couple of questions,
Okay.
some of it specific, some of it a little more general, but
Okay.
yeah, we're going to ferret out a little more about you.
Uh-oh, here we go.
So US, and this is the television show, the US office or the UK office?
Well, okay, so the UK office is far more cringe.
Yeah.
It's maximum cringe, and I find that really difficult. So I think the US office, controversially.
Oh, we're going to have to agree to disagree on that point. Yeah. So maybe, yeah, we can swap countries for that.
Fine, done, deal.
Your most embarrassing moment as a conductor?
Oh, dear God. I have had so many. I couldn't even begin to say. Wow, this is getting into trauma zone. I can tell you my favorite nightmare.
Okay,
So
let's go with that.
This is a really genuine nightmare I had. So I was conducting some big orchestra. I hadn't prepared. I was doing a contemporary piece. Half the orchestra is in an L-shaped room on the other side of the wall and couldn't see me. The podium was a balance board. And I hadn't prepared. I didn't even have the score. And I go up to the composer and I say, could I just borrow your score, please? Because I've been working off the copy and I'd like to use the original. And he hands me a Tupperware box. And I open the Tupperware box and it's full of lettuce leaves covered in mayonnaise. And I'm leafing through these covered in mayonnaise. And the guy looks at me and he says, you do read this kind of notation, don't you? And then I wake up in a cold sweat. So that's very Freudian. Take from that what you will.
Wow. And has this been a recurring nightmare, or did this happen once, but it was so memorable?
This happened once, but it was so memorable. It's kind of just so funny, this idea of because sometimes as a conductor, composers do give you scores where there's a totally different form of notation. And at the front, there's a long list of this symbol means this. And you think, oh, Lord. And you have to learn an entirely different way, this non-traditional way that they've written it down. And that does sometimes happen. That's always a bit of a nightmare for the musicians because we know how to read music the way it's been written for the last 250 years. So to come and suddenly say, well, actually, no, this symbol means this, and then you have to do that. And yeah, that's always a bit of a kind of real life nightmare.
I would say that I hope that never happens to you, but I kind of wish it would, just because you would have one of the most amazing anecdotes in all of classical music history.
Well, you never know. It may have just been a kind of premonition dream. and at some point, maybe Sidney Guillaume is going to hand me a Tupperware box full of letters.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Yeah. This will go out. The symphony, the orchestra will hear that. Sidney Guillaume will hear that and say, oh, we've got something fantastic lined up. Well, thank you so much, James, for coming in today and just chatting about the upcoming concert, the upcoming season, and all the other tangents we went down. So
Great pleasure, EJ. Thanks for having me.